Welcome to Hauntales, where darkest stories come alive. I know many of you tune into these tales to drift off to sleep, so settle in, relax, and get comfortable. Whether you're lying in bed or curled up on the couch, let the whispers of these chilling encounters carry you away. Before we begin tonight's story, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more spine-tingling tales. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it? I love seeing how far our stories travel. For the best experience, use your headphones, close your eyes, and let every word sink deep into your mind. Now we begin our stories for tonight. Story 1. The Mountain. Are we really doing this? Sam's voice was thick with excitement as he leaned over the back of the driver's seat, his face almost glowing in the dim light of the dashboard. "Oh, we're doing it," Becca replied, her voice steady but holding an edge of uncertainty. She was the skeptic of the group, the one who'd roll her eyes at ghost stories and laugh at the supposed haunted places we'd visit. But tonight, even she seemed to feel the pull of something eerie in the air. I grinned, watching the familiar faces of my friends through the rearview mirror. Sam, Becca, Drew, and Lee, my closest friends, bonded over countless nights spent exploring haunted places. Each of us craved a thrill that regular life just couldn't provide, a taste of the unknown that lingered in our minds long after the adventure ended. Our destination was Blackwood Lodge, a place hidden deep in the forests on the outskirts of town. Rumor had it that no one had set foot there in decades, and those who did never came back the same. Eerie stories circled around the place of shadows lurking in the windows, whispers on the wind, and some curse that plagued anyone who dared to enter. It was the kind of place we'd always joked about visiting, but until now, no one had dared to go through with it. "We should be getting close," I said, turning off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path lined with towering trees that seemed to swallow the headlights. A shiver ran down my spine, but I told myself it was just the excitement. I reached over and scratched behind Jasper's ears. He was my dog, my loyal companion for years, and his presence usually calmed me. But tonight, even he seemed tense, his ears pricked, his gaze fixed on the dark forest around us. "Look at him," Leah said, noticing Jasper's alertness. "Do you think he senses something?" "Probably just the excitement," I shrugged, though even I wasn't convinced. Dogs could sense things, I knew that. But what exactly was Jasper sensing now? The dirt path seemed endless, winding deeper into the darkness as the trees closed in around us. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under the tires and the occasional rustle of leaves that made us all jump. It was as if the forest was alive, watching us, waiting. "Are we sure this is the right way?" Drew asked, his voice barely a whisper as he looked around nervously. "This is what the directions say," I replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "It's just a bit farther, I think." The GPS had long since lost signal, and the darkness around us felt thicker, almost tangible. I could feel the weight of the forest pressing in as if it was trying to swallow us whole. Jasper's growling grew more insistent, and his hackles rose as we continued forward. "I don't like this," Becca muttered, her eyes darting around. "It feels wrong." But there was no turning back now. We were too close, and besides, this was what we wanted: a thrill, a scare, a story to tell. We continued forward, the lodge drawing closer with every twist of the road. Then, suddenly, it appeared a dark silhouette against the night sky, looming in the distance like a forgotten memory. Blackwood Lodge. It was larger than I had imagined, a crumbling structure with darkened windows that seemed to stare back at us. The walls were covered in vines, and the roof sagged in places, as if the building itself was slowly decaying. An icy wind blew through the trees, carrying with it a faint, musty odor that made my stomach churn. As we approached, Jasper began to growl louder, his eyes fixed on the lodge. He refused to leave the car, his body rigid with fear. "Jasper, come on," I urged, but he wouldn't budge. He just kept growling, his eyes locked on the shadowy form of the lodge as if it were a predator waiting to strike. "He knows something we don't," Leah whispered, shivering as she looked up at the looming structure. Her bravado was gone, replaced by a look of genuine fear. "Well, we're here now," Sam said, trying to sound confident. "Might as well check it out." I took a deep breath, glancing at my friends one by one. Their faces reflected the same mixture of excitement and unease that I felt, a thrill tempered by the nagging feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. As we stepped out of the car and into the cold night air, a strange silence fell over us. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We approached the lodge slowly, our footsteps crunching on the gravel, each sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The air felt colder here, biting into our skin and filling our lungs with an almost metallic chill. The front door creaked as we pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty hallways like a cry of warning. The inside was just as decayed as the outside, filled with dust and cobwebs that hung from the ceiling like shrouds. "This place is creepy," Becca muttered, her voice barely above a whisper as she glanced around nervously. We walked slowly through the entrance hall, our flashlights cutting through the darkness to reveal faded wallpaper, broken furniture, and strange symbols etched into the walls. Some of the symbols looked ancient, their meanings lost to time, while others were newer, carved hastily as if by someone in a frenzy. "What do you think they mean?" Drew asked, tracing a finger over one of the symbols, a spiral that seemed to twist endlessly into itself. "Probably just graffiti," Sam shrugged, but his voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe someone's idea of a prank." But I wasn't so sure. There was something unsettling about those symbols, something that seemed to reach out and cling to us, like a dark presence lurking just beneath the surface. We continued deeper into the lodge, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls as shadows danced on the walls, shifting and twisting with every movement of our flashlights. "Did you see that?" Leah whispered suddenly, her eyes wide as she pointed down the hall. I turned, my heart pounding as I followed her gaze. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a shadow, darker than the rest, standing at the end of the hall. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving nothing but an empty darkness that seemed to stretch on forever. "It's just your imagination," I said, trying to reassure myself as much as her. But even I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something was watching us from the shadows. We gathered in what must have once been a dining room, though now it was little more than a shell of its former self. A long table stood in the center, covered in dust and grime, with broken chairs scattered around it like fallen soldiers. As we stood there, catching our breath and trying to steady our nerves, Becca suddenly gasped, clutching her arm. "What's wrong?" I asked, alarmed. She held out her arm, and we all stared in shock at the mark that had appeared on her skin, a dark, twisted symbol that looked disturbingly similar to the ones carved into the walls. It was faint, almost like a bruise, but it pulsed slightly as if it were alive. I don't know how it got there," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I didn't feel anything, but it just appeared." We all looked at each other, fear creeping into our eyes as we realized that this was no prank, no harmless scare. Something had marked her, something that we couldn't see, but that was very much real. One by one, we checked our own arms, and to our horror, each of us found a similar mark, hidden beneath our sleeves, etched into our skin like a brand. "What does it mean?" Drew whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. None of us had an answer, but in that moment, we all knew one thing for certain. We had awakened something in this place, something dark and ancient that was now a part of us. Certainly, here's the next part, taking us deeper into the unfolding nightmare. After we discovered the markings on our arms, none of us spoke for a while. We stood in that dark, decaying dining room, each of us lost in our own fearful thoughts. The silence was heavy, broken only by our uneven breaths and the occasional creak of the building settling. I could feel a chill creeping up my spine, like an invisible hand pressing down on us, making the air thick and cold. "We should leave," Leah finally whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Sam, usually the one to push forward with whatever thrill-seeking plan we'd come up with, nodded this time, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Yeah, this isn't normal. We shouldn't be here." We all turned to leave, but as we made our way back through the hallways, it felt as though the lodge itself was resisting us. The halls seemed darker, narrower, the shadows denser and more sinister. Our footsteps echoed louder than before, as if something was amplifying every sound, reminding us we were not alone. Jasper had somehow wriggled out of his harness and was now waiting by the entrance, barking incessantly. His cries sounded different, less like his usual barks, and more like desperate yelps that tore through the silence, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I felt a wave of relief as I reached the door, eager to feel the cold night air on my skin again. But when I pulled it open, a wall of black fog rolled in, swallowing the entrance and blocking our path. But the Drew choked, his voice trembling as he stumbled back. The fog was thick, impenetrable, and it seemed to pulse as it filled the room, like it had a life of its own. It carried with it an overwhelming stench of rot and decay, the kind that clings to your skin and fills your lungs, making it hard to breathe. We stumbled back, coughing, as the fog spread through the lodge, covering everything in a shroud of darkness. "There has to be another way out," Becca said, panic creeping into her voice as she clutched my arm. I tried to steady my breathing, nodding as I forced myself to stay calm. "Let's try the back entrance. It leads to the forest." The others agreed, and we turned back, our flashlights cutting through the dark as we moved through the lodge, desperate to find an escape. But the fog was relentless, creeping through the cracks and corners, following us like a shadow that couldn't be shaken. And worse, it seemed to bring something with it, a faint whispering, a low murmur that echoed through the halls, growing louder with every step. The whispers clawed at the edges of my mind, slithering in and out of coherence, as if trying to form words but always dissolving before they could make sense. I glanced at my friends, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear as the whispers seemed to press in on us from all sides. "Do you hear that?" Leah's voice was barely a whisper as she clung to Sam's arm, her knuckles white. We all nodded, unable to deny it any longer. The voices were real, haunting us, filling the air with a chilling, inhuman murmur. It felt like the lodge was alive, breathing, watching us with unseen eyes, and those whispers, they were like warnings, telling us we didn't belong. As we stumbled through the halls, something brushed against my skin, a cold, slimy sensation that made me recoil. I shined my flashlight on my arm, expecting to see dust or cobwebs, but what I saw made my stomach drop. It was one of the marks, but this time it was moving. The dark lines twisted and pulsed under my skin, shifting like they were alive, crawling just beneath the surface. I bit back a scream, my hand shaking as I watched the mark writhe, the dark shape slithering up my arm. "It's happening to me too," Sam said, his voice choked with fear as he rolled up his sleeve. The mark on his arm was moving as well, shifting under his skin like a snake trapped in his veins. We looked at each other, horror filling our eyes as we realized the markings weren't just symbols, they were alive, and they were spreading. Desperation took over, and we broke into a run, moving through the decaying halls and pushing past broken furniture as we tried to reach the back door. The whispers grew louder, filling the lodge with a chorus of voices, each one more menacing than the last. Finally, we burst through the back entrance and into the forest, gulping in the cool night air as the fog spilled out behind us, stopping just at the edge of the trees as if held back by an invisible barrier. We didn't stop to question it. We ran deeper into the forest, our footsteps pounding on the forest floor as we tried to put as much distance as possible between us and the lodge. But even as we ran, the feeling of being watched didn't fade. I could feel it, like eyes pressing into my back, cold and unforgiving. The forest itself seemed darker, denser, as if it had absorbed some of the lodge's malevolence. The branches reached out like skeletal fingers, scraping against our skin, and the ground beneath our feet felt unsteady, like it could swallow us whole at any moment. We finally stopped to catch our breath, our lungs burning, our bodies shaking as we huddled together in the middle of the forest. What was that? Drew panted, looking back toward the lodge, his face pale with terror. Something unnatural, I managed to say, my voice barely steady. We need to get out of here. Now. But as we turned to continue, a strange sensation washed over me, a cold, tingling feeling that crawled up my spine and settled at the base of my neck. I looked down and saw it again, the mark, pulsing on my skin, glowing faintly in the darkness. And then I heard it, a low, raspy whisper, like the wind itself was speaking to me. "You cannot leave." I froze, my heart pounding as the words echoed in my mind, dark and sinister. I looked at my friends, their faces mirroring the same horror I felt. They had heard it too. "You are marked." We didn't know what to do. The forest around us was vast and unending, a maze of twisted trees and thorn-covered vines that seemed to close in tighter with every step we took. We were lost, both in the physical and psychological sense, trapped in a nightmare with no way out. As we walked, the marks on our skin continued to pulse, their lines growing darker and more intricate, forming patterns that seemed to shift and twist like living creatures. It was as if the marks were feeding off our fear, growing stronger with every moment we stayed in the forest. "I can feel it." Under my skin, Becca whispered, her voice trembling as she scratched at her arm. "It's like it's alive." I felt it too, a cold, crawling sensation that moved through my veins, like insects burrowing just beneath the surface. No matter how much I tried to shake it off, the feeling persisted, growing more intense with each passing second. The forest was no longer just a place, it was a presence, watching us, surrounding us, its branches reaching out like dark tendrils, trying to drag us back into the shadows. "I don't think we're supposed to leave," Leah said, her voice barely audible as she stared into the darkness, her eyes wide with fear. "It wants us here." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that there was a way out, but deep down I felt the same thing. The lodge, the marks, the whispers, they were all connected, all part of something ancient and malevolent that had ensnared us in its grasp. We had walked into its trap, and now it wasn't going to let us go. Our footsteps fell heavy and uncertain as we pushed through the dense forest, too afraid to look back at the lodge but unable to shake the feeling that something was closing in on us. I couldn't explain it, but there was a heaviness in the air, as if the forest itself was watching, its trees swaying slightly even though there was no wind. Then, just when we thought the forest had swallowed us completely, a dim, flickering light appeared in the distance. It was pale and sickly, casting an eerie glow that barely broke through the oppressive darkness. It wasn't the comforting warmth of a fire or even the sterile beam of a flashlight. It was unnatural, like the last ember of a dying star. There's someone else out here," Drew whispered, more to himself than anyone else. We were torn. The light could mean other people, locals maybe, or even campers. But with every strange event we'd encountered, the idea of running into anyone who could be friendly felt slim. Still, we were desperate. "Let's check it out," Sam said, his voice barely masking the tremor of fear that had finally broken his usual confidence. I wanted to protest, to tell him it was a terrible idea, but I stayed silent. Something about the light called to me, pulling me forward even as my instincts screamed to turn back. As we drew closer, the light seemed to change, casting strange shadows that danced along the ground, twisting and contorting as if alive. It was coming from an old lantern hanging off the branch of a tree, swinging gently even though the air was completely still. "Who would leave this here?" Leah asked, her eyes wide as she reached out to touch the lantern. But before she could, a low voice echoed through the darkness, stopping her hand mid-air. "Turn back." "Mario." The voice was neither a whisper nor a shout, but something in between a rasping, hollow sound that seemed to resonate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, sending a chill down my spine. Did anyone else hear that? I stammered, looking at my friends, their faces pale and frightened. They nodded, wide-eyed, as the light flickered, growing dimmer with each passing second. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the lantern went dark, plunging us back into pitch blackness. We stood there, frozen, as silence fell around us like a shroud, suffocating and heavy. "We need to leave," now Becca said, her voice barely more than a whisper. But as we turned to walk away, I felt something brush against my shoulder, a cold, invisible touch that left a burning sensation in its wake. I stumbled forward, reaching up to feel my shoulder, only to find the same mark that had appeared on my arm now branded there as well. I felt nauseous, the reality sinking in that whatever was out there, it was marking us, claiming us. And the more marks we received, the harder it became to shake the feeling that we were being watched, hunted by something that thrived in the darkness. We pushed on, desperate to escape the forest, but every path we took seemed to lead us deeper, winding in circles as if the trees themselves were shifting to keep us from finding our way out. Then, through the fog and shadows, we saw a faint glow, this time softer, warmer, like the flickering of a fire. And as we approached, we realized we'd stumbled upon a small, dilapidated cabin nestled between two ancient, twisted trees. A hunched figure sat outside, cloaked in darkness and illuminated only by the faint light of a lantern at his feet. Is he real?" Leah whispered, clutching my arm as she stared at the figure, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. I didn't know. Nothing felt real anymore. But as we approached, the figure turned his head, revealing a face etched with age, his eyes clouded and distant, but filled with an unsettling awareness. "You've come from the lodge," he said, his voice low and rough, as though speaking through gravel. "I can smell it on you." We exchanged glances, each of us unnerved by his words, but too desperate for answers to turn back now. "Please," I said, stepping forward. "We don't know what's happening to us. There are these marks on our skin, and something is following us. We just want to leave." The old man nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the forest behind us. "The lodge is a place of shadows, a resting place for spirits that were bound long before you or I existed. You shouldn't have gone there." "We know that now," Sam snapped, his voice tight with fear and frustration. "But how do we get rid of these marks? How do we get out of here?" The elder's face grew somber, his gaze returning to us with a sadness that chilled me to the bone. "Once marked, the forest will not let you go easily. You are part of it now, bound by the same darkness that lies beneath its roots." "There has to be a way," Becca pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please tell us what we need to do." The elder sighed, his eyes distant, as if he were remembering something long forgotten. "There is one way, a place where the curse was born, deep within the mountain beyond the forest. It is said that those who reach its heart can find a way to break the bond, if they're willing to pay the price." "What price?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The elder's gaze shifted to each of us, lingering for a moment, as if weighing our worth. To break a bond forged in darkness, you must offer something of equal weight. Sacrifice in one form or another. The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding, and I felt a sense of dread settle over me as I realized the full weight of what he was saying. You mean one of us has to? Drew asked, his face pale as he stared at the elder in horror. The elder didn't answer, but his silence was all we needed. A chill ran through me as I looked at my friends, each of us realizing that our escape from this nightmare might come at a terrible cost. With no other choice, we set out toward the mountain, the elder's words echoing in our minds like a grim prophecy. The forest seemed even darker than before, the shadows deeper and more oppressive, as if it knew what we were trying to do and was determined to stop us. We moved in silence, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves that covered the forest floor. Every now and then I would catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, dark, twisted shapes that slithered and crawled just out of sight, watching us with a malevolent curiosity. As we walked, the marks on our skin began to burn, the dark lines pulsing in time with our heartbeats. It was as if the forest was tightening its grip on us, trying to pull us back into its depths. "Do you think we'll make it?" Leah asked, her voice barely a whisper as she clutched my arm, her eyes filled with fear. I didn't know how to answer her. I wanted to tell her that we would all make it out of this alive. But the truth was, I didn't believe it myself. The mountain loomed ahead of us, its jagged peaks shrouded in mist, a dark silhouette against the starless sky. It seemed to radiate a cold, malevolent energy, like a sleeping beast that had been disturbed. As we reached the base of the mountain, a faint rumble echoed through the air, a sound like distant thunder that made the ground tremble beneath our feet. "We're almost there," Sam said, his voice filled with a false bravado that did little to mask the fear in his eyes. But as we began our ascent, I felt a growing sense of dread settle over me. The mountain was not just a place, it was alive, watching us, waiting for us to reach its heart so it could claim us as its own. The path up the mountain was steep and treacherous, the jagged rocks jutting out like the bones of a long-dead creature. Each step sent small rocks tumbling down the slope, echoes bouncing off the stone walls surrounding us. The air grew colder as we climbed, the temperature dropping sharply as the shadows stretched out, enveloping us in their embrace. "Can you feel that?" Drew asked, his voice low, glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting to see something lurking just out of sight. I nodded, an unsettling sense of dread coiling in my stomach. It was as if the mountain itself was alive, a sentient being that was aware of our presence, observing us as we ventured deeper into its realm. The deeper we climbed, the more disorienting the landscape became. Trees became twisted sculptures, their gnarled limbs reaching out like clawed fingers, trying to ensnare us. Strange sounds echoed around us, whispers that floated through the air like smoke, a dissonant chorus that seemed to speak in a language we could not understand. At one point we paused to catch our breath, leaning against a cool rock face. The marks on our skin were a constant, painful reminder of our predicament, the dark symbols seeming to throb in time with our pulses. "What if we can't break the curse?" Becca asked, her voice trembling as she gazed up at the looming peaks above us. "We have to," I replied, forcing conviction into my words. "We can't let it take us. We can't let it take anyone else." But as we continued our ascent, that conviction began to wane. Shadows shifted in our periphery, and I could swear I saw fleeting figures darting between the trees, their movements too quick to fully comprehend. My heart raced with each step, the fear that had been a low hum in the background now roaring to life. By the time we reached a plateau, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving us in near complete darkness. Only the thin sliver of moonlight provided any illumination, casting eerie shadows that danced across the rocks. "This is a good spot to rest," Sam suggested, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "We should gather our strength before we go further." We nodded, though the idea of sitting still felt wrong, as if doing so would invite whatever haunted the mountain to come and claim us. We settled down, backs against the cool stone, trying to shake off the growing dread that had settled over us. But as we sat in silence, the atmosphere shifted, and a heavy silence enveloped us. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the distance, an unsettling reminder of the forest below, still alive and hungry. I leaned back against the rock, closing my eyes for a moment, trying to focus on anything but the gnawing anxiety that gripped me. But just as I began to relax, I felt the marks on my skin begin to burn, a sudden flare of heat that spread through my body. Alex Becca's voice broke through the darkness, tinged with panic. "What's happening?" "Something's wrong," I replied, heart racing. "It feels like." And then it hit me, a rush of visions, each one more disturbing than the last. I was no longer sitting with my friends, I was being pulled into a realm of nightmares. I saw their faces twisted in agony, contorted by fear, their eyes wide with terror as dark figures loomed over them. Alex Sam's voice shattered the illusion, yanking me back to the present. He was shaking me, his eyes wild with fear. "What did you see?" he demanded, urgency lacing his voice. I don't know. It was like we were being hunted," I stammered, trying to catch my breath. But it wasn't just me. One by one, each of us began to share our own horrors. Drew saw Leah's face melting away, revealing a skull beneath, while Leah described visions of Sam being torn apart by shadows. Becca, with tears in her eyes, spoke of a gaping maw that opened in the ground, ready to swallow her whole. "We can't stay here," I said, rising to my feet, feeling the oppressive weight of dread settling in again. "We need to keep moving." As we pressed onward, the path narrowed and the air grew colder, almost biting. The whispers from earlier began to swell, forming an almost tangible sound that seemed to curl around us like smoke. "Can you hear that?" Drew whispered, his voice laced with unease. "It's getting louder," Leah replied, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Maybe it's just the wind," Sam suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. But deep down I felt that the whispers were not the wind. They were calling to us, a cacophony of voices that rose and fell like a tide, each wave crashing against our sanity. The shadows thickened, swirling around our feet, and I could feel the weight of something ancient and malevolent pressing down on us. And then it came, a figure emerging from the darkness, barely visible against the shadows. It was indistinct at first, a shifting mass that seemed to defy comprehension, but as it moved closer, I could see eyes, thousands of them gleaming like shards of glass. "Do not resist," it whispered, its voice echoing in my mind, a sickly sweet lull that threatened to pull me under. "You are already marked. You cannot escape." I stumbled backward, my heart racing. "We're not yours," I shouted, but the words felt hollow, swallowed by the shadows that danced around us. "Turn back," the figure said, and for a moment I felt the urge to obey, to give in to the darkness, to let it wash over me like a warm blanket. But I fought it, digging my nails into my palms to ground myself. "We won't turn back," I said defiantly, standing my ground as the entity loomed closer, the darkness swirling around it like a cloak. "We're going to break this curse." Laughter erupted from the creature, a sound that echoed in the hollow of the mountain. You cannot break what has been bound. You are part of this now, part of the cycle. With a surge of determination, I turned to my friends, their faces lit with fear and resolve. We have to keep going. We can't let it stop us. With every ounce of willpower, we pressed on, pushing past the dark figure and its haunting whispers. It shrieked, the sound reverberating through the mountain like a crack of thunder, but we didn't look back. The path continued upward, twisting and turning, growing steeper with each step. We found ourselves in a narrow canyon, the towering rock walls closing in on us, making the air feel thick and heavy. The oppressive atmosphere pressed down like a weight, squeezing the breath from our lungs. But as we climbed, something began to change. The whispers receded, fading into the background like a distant memory, and the air felt lighter, as if we were finally escaping the clutches of the darkness. We stumbled into a clearing, a small plateau at the mountain's edge. Before us lay a massive stone altar, covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. It was surrounded by ancient, twisted trees that seemed to lean in, as if eager to witness what would happen next. "This must be it," Becca said, stepping forward. "This must be the place." But even as she spoke, I felt the weight of dread creeping back, the shadows moving at the edge of my vision. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't over yet. As we approached the altar, I could see that the symbols were intricately carved into the stone, spiraling and twisting around one another, pulsating softly as if alive. A deep sense of foreboding settled over me, a feeling that we had crossed into a place that was not just haunted but sacred in a twisted, dark way. "This is it," I repeated, a sense of urgency filling my voice. "We have to perform the ritual here." "Do you even know how?" Drew asked, his voice shaky. "We don't even know what we're supposed to do." "I don't know," I admitted, feeling a wave of panic wash over me. "But the elders said we need to offer something. Maybe we can find a way to break the bond." We gathered around the altar, the cold stone pressing against our palms as we traced the symbols with our fingers. They felt warm, alive, almost humming with energy, and I could sense the darkness swirling around us, eager to intervene. The air thickened as shadows crept closer, coiling around our feet like tendrils of smoke, whispering promises of despair and fear. "You cannot escape," the whispers echoed, rising and falling in a chilling cadence. "You are already ours." Ignoring the voices, I closed my eyes and focused on the symbols, hoping to find some clarity, some guidance. I envisioned the power flowing through us, the connection to the mountain, to the ancient spirits that resided here. And then I heard it, a voice, soft but clear, cutting through the noise. "Sacrifice is needed, but not in the way you think." I opened my eyes, startled by the clarity of the thought. "It's not about death," I said, voice trembling with the weight of revelation. "It's about what we're willing to give up, our fears, our darkness." "What do you mean?" Leia asked, brows furrowed in confusion. "It's a part of us," I continued, feeling a surge of resolve. "We need to release the darkness that binds us, not just our blood or lives." With newfound determination, we each took a step back from the altar, closing our eyes and focusing on the fears that had haunted us. I could feel the marks on my skin pulsating, the energy within me shifting as I visualized the darkness, my insecurities, my doubts, everything that had held me captive. "Let it go," I murmured, pushing it all out of my mind, envisioning it flowing from my body like dark smoke. I felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifting from my shoulders. One by one, my friends followed suit, their faces contorted in concentration. Becca gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks as she released her burdens, the darkness evaporating into the night air. Drew's fists clenched at his sides as he expelled his own fears, the shadows swirling around us becoming erratic and wild, as if trying to cling to their prey. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness surged. It writhed and twisted, becoming more aggressive, angry at being denied its sustenance. The whispers rose to a deafening cacophony, a chorus of rage that rattled the stones beneath our feet. Faster, I shouted, the urgency of the moment pushing us all. We're almost there. As we continued to release our fears, the shadows began to dissipate, flickering like candles in a strong wind. The altar responded, the symbols glowing brighter, radiating warmth that spread through the air like a beacon. Finally, with a last push, we expelled the last remnants of our darkness. The shadows shrieked, a sound that pierced the night as they were consumed by the light. For a moment, everything was still silent, as if the world held its breath. And then it erupted. A blinding light shot up from the altar, engulfing us in its warmth. We shielded our eyes as the energy swirled around us, lifting us off our feet, spiraling into the air. It felt as if the very essence of the mountain was welcoming us, embracing us, finally freeing us from its grip. As the light dimmed and we found ourselves back on solid ground, a sense of calm washed over us. The air was lighter, the shadows retreating into the distance, their whispers fading to a distant memory. We did it, Leah breathed, a mixture of disbelief and relief in her voice. We actually did it. But even as we celebrated, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. The mountain was silent now, but its secrets still lingered. There was still much we didn't understand. We have to go back down, I said, glancing at the horizon where the first light of dawn was breaking. We need to warn others, to make sure no one else gets hurt by this place. But as we began our descent, the air grew heavy again. Shadows crept at the edges of our vision, and I realized that while we had freed ourselves, the darkness would always linger, watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. As we carefully navigated the rocky path, I felt a shiver run down my spine, the sense of being watched settling over me like a cloak. The forest below seemed more alive than ever, the rustling leaves and whispering winds an ever-present reminder of the darkness we had escaped. "Stay close," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We don't know what else might be lurking here. But deep down, I felt it, the lingering connection to the mountain, the pull of the shadows that had woven their way into our lives. Even as we moved further away, the weight of it clung to us, a constant reminder of our encounter. And then in the distance, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us with unblinking eyes. My heart dropped, fear pooling in my stomach. "Who is that?" Drew asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady as the figure remained still, an ominous silhouette against the dawn. "Should we go back?" Leah asked, hesitating, her eyes wide with trepidation. "No," I said firmly, feeling a surge of protectiveness wash over me. "We have to keep moving. We can't let it know we're afraid." We quickened our pace, leaving the figure behind us, though the sense of being watched lingered. As the sun rose higher in the sky, it cast a warm glow over the landscape, dispelling the darkness that had settled over us. But even as the warmth enveloped us, I couldn't shake the feeling that our journey was far from over. The mountain had claimed us, and its darkness would always remain a part of us, whispering promises of power and fear. We had escaped for now, but I knew that one day we would have to confront it again. And so, with the first rays of dawn illuminating our path, we pressed on, determined to carry the weight of our experience with us, to share the tale of the mountain that had almost consumed us whole. It was a story of survival, of facing our fears, and of the unbreakable bond we had forged in the depths of darkness. And as we descended into the light, I couldn't help but feel that while we may have escaped the clutches of the mountain, we would forever be bound to its secrets, its shadows always lurking just beyond the edge of our vision. The descent felt surreal, each step echoing the tumult of emotions that churned within me. As we moved away from the mountain, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. The sun was rising higher, its golden rays piercing through the trees, illuminating the path before us. Yet the shadows danced in the corners of my mind, taunting me with memories of our encounter. "What do you think that figure was?" Becca asked, her voice shaky. We had finally reached a flat area near the forest's edge, where the path split into two. One led back to the town, while the other wound deeper into the woods, where the trees were thick and oppressive. "I don't know," I replied, glancing back over my shoulder as if expecting to see the figure standing there, watching us. "But I have a feeling it's connected to the mountain." Drew, who had been silent since we left the altar, finally spoke up. "What if it's another one of those, whatever they were, the shadows?" "I don't want to find out," Leah said, her eyes scanning the woods nervously. "We should stick together and head back." "Agreed," I said, feeling a sense of urgency to get away from the mountain and its haunting memories. But as we turned to leave, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was still watching us, hidden in the underbrush, waiting for the right moment to strike. As we reached the town, the familiar sights felt different, almost foreign. The sun was bright, but it couldn't dispel the unease that clung to me. We made our way to the diner, where we always gathered after our adventures, hoping the mundane setting would ground us. Seated at our usual booth, the waitress brought over steaming cups of coffee, her smile bright but unaware of the shadows that lingered behind our eyes. I watched my friends, the lines of fear etched on their faces, and felt a surge of protectiveness. "We'll get through this," I said, breaking the silence. "We faced it together, and we're still here. We need to talk about what happened." But as the words left my mouth, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. What had we truly faced? The mountain was a part of our lives now, and the secrets we uncovered would forever shape who we were. "I just don't understand," Leah said, her hands trembling as she cradled her coffee. "Why us? Why did it choose us?" "I think it was drawn to our fears," I said, recalling the suffocating darkness that had clung to us. "It feeds on that weakness. Maybe it saw something in each of us." "We have to be careful," Becca warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if it follows us? What if it wants to finish what it started?" I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear that we'd just escaped something far more sinister than we had realized. The shadows weren't just part of the mountain, they were part of us now. Days turned into weeks, and life went on. Yet, the shadows never fully left. I noticed subtle changes in my friends. Leah became more withdrawn, often staring into space, as if listening to whispers only she could hear. Becca, usually the most cheerful, started having nightmares, her sleep punctuated by gasps and shouts. Drew's humor faded, replaced by a somber intensity as he became increasingly fixated on the mountain. I tried to keep us together, organizing outings and distractions, but the mountain loomed over us, a dark specter haunting our thoughts. The conversations we once had became more subdued, filled with unspoken fears and concerns. One evening, I decided to confront the darkness. I gathered my friends at my house, determined to face what we had been avoiding. "We can't keep pretending everything is okay," I said as we sat in the dim light of my living room. shadows stretching across the walls. We need to talk about what happened on the mountain. I think we should go back, Drew blurted out, his eyes alight with an intensity that surprised me. Are you crazy? Leah snapped, her voice a mix of disbelief and fear. After everything we went through. I know it sounds insane, Drew replied, but I can't shake this feeling. It's like there's something unfinished, something we need to confront. We can't let it control us. What do you mean? Becca asked, her voice trembling. You want us to face it again? Yes, he said firmly. But this time we prepare. We'll go equipped with everything we learned. The next few days were a blur of planning and anxiety. We gathered supplies, flashlights, ropes, food, anything we thought might help us this time. I could feel the tension building as we prepared, each of us wrestling with our own fears while trying to stay strong for one another. On the eve of our return, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, the darkness creeping into my mind. I thought about the figure we had seen, the shadows that had nearly consumed us, and the sense of dread that always seemed to hover just out of reach. Finally, I got up and wandered outside, the cool night air hitting my skin like a shock. I needed to clear my head. The stars above twinkled, distant and indifferent to the turmoil below. Hey, a voice broke the silence. I turned to see Leah standing on the porch, her expression troubled. Can't sleep either. I guess not, I said, trying to smile. Just thinking about everything. I feel it too, she admitted, her voice soft. It's like the mountain's still with us, and it won't let go. I know, I replied, my heart heavy with understanding. But we have to face it together. We have to reclaim our lives. Leah nodded, though her eyes reflected the fear we all felt. Promise me we'll look out for each other, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Always, I vowed, feeling the weight of my promise settle over me like a shield. The following day, we set out for the mountain once more, the air thick with tension. As we hiked up the familiar path, the memories of our previous encounter flooded back. Every step echoed with the weight of our past, a reminder of the darkness that awaited us. Arriving at the altar, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The air was charged with energy, crackling with anticipation. The stones were cold beneath my fingers as I traced the symbols carved into the surface. We're here to reclaim our power, I declared, feeling the resolve build within me. We won't let it control us anymore. Drew stepped forward, his face resolute. This time we do it together. No holding back. With a shared nod, we formed a circle around the altar, each of us holding hands. I closed my eyes, summoning the strength of our bond, the memories of our shared fears, and the courage we had found within ourselves. Together, I said, opening my eyes to see my friends looking back at me, their expressions filled with determination. As we began to chant, a low rumble resonated from the depths of the mountain. The shadows that had once tormented us began to swirl, rising like a storm, their whispers growing louder. The energy crackled around us, a tempest of fear and anger. Focus on your fears, I shouted over the cacophony, feeling the shadows pressing against us, testing our resolve. Release them. We're stronger together. One by one, we began to release our fears, our voices rising above the chaos. The shadows writhed, angry at our defiance, but we held firm, our hands gripping tighter, channeling our strength into the chant. The energy around us surged, a wave of light crashing against the darkness. I felt the shadows clawing at my mind, trying to break through, but I pushed back, fueled by the memories of our struggles, our pain, and our triumphs. We won't be silenced, I roared, feeling the power coursing through me. a bright flame against the encroaching darkness. As our voices reached a fever pitch, the shadows coiled and snapped, their forms becoming more distinct, more human-like, faces twisted in rage and despair. It was as if the mountain itself was fighting back, refusing to let go of its hold on us. But we didn't waver. We stood strong, our connection to each other grounding us. "We are not afraid," Leia shouted, her voice rising above the tumult, a rallying cry that sparked the fire within us all. In that moment, we felt it, a shift, a change. The shadows hesitated, their forms flickering like flames in the wind. It was the moment we had been waiting for. Now I screamed, and we pushed our combined energy outward, a wave of light exploding from the altar, engulfing the shadows in its brilliance. The shadows screeched, a sound that reverberated through the mountain, the noise both anguished and furious. The light consumed them, and I felt the oppressive weight of fear begin to lift, the darkness being expelled into the ether. Finally, with one last surge of power, the shadows evaporated, disappearing into the night as if they had never been. The air grew still, and silence enveloped us, the weight of our fears dissipating like mist in the morning sun. We stood there, panting, disbelief washing over us. The mountain had been silent for too long, its echoes fading into nothingness. "We did it," Drew breathed, his voice filled with awe. "We faced our fears," Becca said, tears of relief glistening in her eyes. And in that moment, we realized that the shadows were not just external threats. They were the remnants of our past fears and insecurities, and we had faced them together, emerging stronger. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, we descended the mountain, our hearts lighter than they had been in weeks. The weight of our experience had transformed us, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose blossoming within. The town welcomed us with open arms, but I knew we would never be the same. The shadows had forged a bond between us, one that would last a lifetime. Though the memories of our ordeal would linger, we were free now, free to live, to laugh, to love without the specter of fear looming over us. And as I looked back at the mountain, I felt a sense of gratitude. It had shown us the depths of our darkness, but also illuminated the strength we carried within. We were survivors, and together we would continue to shine. As the months passed, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the experience lingered in our minds. The shadows had not just taught us about fear, they had shown us the importance of resilience and friendship. We started a small group, sharing our story with others who had faced their own darkness. We became advocates for mental health awareness, encouraging open conversations about fear, anxiety, and the strength found in vulnerability. Together, we explored new adventures, each step a reminder of how far we had come. The mountain had become a symbol of our triumph, a testament to the power of unity in the face of adversity. And while the echoes of the past might never fully fade, we embraced them, knowing they had shaped us into who we were meant to be. The shadows would always be there, a part of our journey, but we had learned to walk in the light, side by side, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As I looked around at my friends, I felt a surge of gratitude for the journey we had taken together. We were no longer just a group of friends, we were a family bound by shared experiences, each echo a reminder of our strength. And so the journey continues, a story forever unfolding, with each new adventure a chapter waiting to be written. The end. Story 2. The Last Journey Home. Ethan Mitchell often took the same rural road to visit a small village nestled in the hills. A seasoned traveler, he found comfort in the familiarity of the winding path that led to his childhood home. But this time, On a fateful autumn evening, everything felt different. As he drove home after a long day visiting friends, an unsettling aura settled over the landscape. The road he had known so well was transforming. As dusk fell, the once vibrant trees seemed to loom ominously, their branches clawing at the twilight sky like skeletal fingers. Shadows danced along the roadside, and an unexpected chill clung to the air, wrapping around him like a shroud. The crunch of fallen leaves under his tires became a sinister whisper, urging him to turn back. Ethan shook off the creeping discomfort. He had driven this road countless times, surely it was just his imagination. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he felt a growing unease, like the atmosphere itself was thickening with an unseen dread. His heart raced, and he turned the radio up, hoping to drown out the strange noises that surrounded him. But then he saw them. Figures began to appear along the roadside, hazy silhouettes of people, their forms barely distinguishable in the encroaching darkness. They emerged from the trees, waving their arms frantically, faces contorted in fear and desperation. Ethan's stomach knotted as he slowed the car, squinting through the windshield. "Stop. Turn back," one of them shouted, their voice carrying a panicked urgency that pierced through the evening air. Ethan's brow furrowed, confusion flooding his mind. Who were these people? Why were they out here in the dark? He rolled down the window, straining to hear over the rustle of leaves. "What's going on?" he called out, irritation bubbling beneath his surface. "You don't understand. You have to turn back now," another figure yelled, their voice cracking with intensity. "It's not safe to go any further." Ethan dismissed them as local eccentrics, perhaps caught up in some odd rural custom. He had heard stories of the village's peculiar traditions, strange rituals performed during this time of year to appease ancient forces. But he brushed them off as mere folklore, tales told by old men over too many drinks. With a deep breath, he pressed on, dismissing their warnings as overreactions. But the unease settled deeper within him, twisting his gut as he drove into the thickening darkness. The trees closed in around him, the road narrowing, the familiar turning foreign. The gathering shadows. As Ethan continued along the winding path, more figures appeared along the roadside, their faces distorted with panic and anger. Some seemed to plead, arms outstretched as if trying to pull him from the vehicle, while others shouted angry warnings, their voices rising in a crescendo of despair. "Stop. You don't know what's ahead," a man yelled, his face lit by the flickering light of an old lantern. Ethan's heart raced. Their frenzied gestures and pleading voices sent a jolt of fear through him. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting the instinct to turn around. He had traveled this road too many times to succumb to irrational fear, hadn't he? Yet with each passing moment, an inexplicable urge to press on battled with the terror that clawed at his senses. He recalled previous trips to the village, the odd gatherings at twilight, hushed whispers among the locals, the strange symbols etched into the trees. Each time he had brushed them aside, convinced they were nothing more than remnants of superstition. But now, those memories twisted into ominous signs, warning him of the darkness that lay ahead. Ethan accelerated, the engine roaring as he pushed the car harder, seeking to escape the growing dread. The air felt heavy, the atmosphere charged with something sinister, and he fought the urge to glance in the rearview mirror, terrified of what he might see. The figures along the roadside grew more numerous, their faces blending into an indistinct mass of fear and desperation. They formed a barricade, stepping into the road, blocking his path. Panic surged within him as he slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "Turn back," they cried in unison, their voices a haunting chorus echoing in the gathering darkness. "You're too late." The curse unveiled. The realization struck Ethan like a cold wave crashing against his chest. He remembered the stories about the village legends of an ancient curse tied to the road, whispered fears of outsiders being seen as sacrifices during this time of year. A deep chill enveloped him as he grasped the weight of their words. Had he unwittingly driven into the heart of this dark tradition? The locals weren't just frantic, they were desperate to save him from a fate he hadn't even considered. He glanced around, seeking an escape route, but the villagers were closing in, their expressions shifting from fear to a more sinister resolve. The atmosphere turned electric, thick with an energy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, and he felt as if unseen eyes were watching him, waiting. "Please, I need to get home," he pleaded, his voice shaking as he looked into the wild eyes of the villagers. "I don't want any trouble." One of them snarled, their face contorting with rage. "This is your home now. You cannot escape." In that moment, panic surged through him, his instincts screaming for him to run. He slammed the car into reverse, the tires spinning against the gravel as he fought to escape the encroaching mass of bodies. But before he could make his getaway, a deafening crash reverberated through the air. The car jolted violently, and Ethan felt the engine sputter and die, plunging him into darkness. The headlights flickered, illuminating the frightened faces around him, now twisted into grotesque masks of anticipation, into the heart of darkness. Stranded and vulnerable, Ethan opened the door and bolted from the car, heart racing as he plunged into the thicket of trees lining the road. The shadows stretched and writhed around him, as if alive. He could hear the villagers behind him, their shouts echoing in the dark, urging him to return, to surrender. But there was no going back. The fear coursing through his veins propelled him deeper into the woods, where the air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. He stumbled over roots and rocks, branches clawing at his clothes, the underbrush whispering secrets he dared not hear. Suddenly he broke into a clearing, illuminated by flickering torchlight. The sight that met his eyes sent a fresh wave of terror through him. The villagers had gathered, forming a circle around a makeshift altar, a crude stone structure adorned with flowers, animal bones, and strange symbols carved into the earth. At the center stood a figure cloaked in dark robes, the leader of the villagers, a man whose presence radiated authority and malevolence. Ethan recognized him from his previous visits, a man who had always seemed to linger at the edge of gatherings, watching with an unsettling intensity. "Welcome, outsider," the leader intoned, his voice deep and resonant, sending chills down Ethan's spine. "You have arrived just in time for the ritual." Ethan's breath hitched, and he took a step back, heart pounding. "What ritual? I don't want any part of this." The villagers' chants began to rise around him, a haunting melody that echoed through the trees. The leader raised his arms, and the chanting grew louder, filling the air with a palpable dread. "You are chosen," the leader continued, a cruel smile creeping across his face. "Tonight we honor the spirits with a sacrifice, and you, Ethan, are the one they seek." The shadows close in. Panic surged through Ethan as the realization sank in. He was the sacrifice. He had driven right into their dark tradition, oblivious to the signs and the warnings. The villagers began to advance, their eyes gleaming with fervor, chanting in a language that twisted the very fabric of the night. Desperation clawed at his mind as he turned to flee, but the figures around the altar closed in, their hands reaching out as if to pull him back into their fold. He stumbled backward, fear blinding him as he searched for an escape. The woods, once familiar, felt foreign and hostile, shadows shifting ominously with each frantic step he took. Ethan's heart raced as he darted through the trees, branches snagging at his clothes, the sounds of the villagers' chants growing louder behind him. He could feel their energy, an oppressive force that wrapped around him like a dark fog. With each breath, the air grew thicker, suffocating him, making it harder to run. He burst through the trees and found himself back on the road, the car looming like a ghost in the darkness. In that moment of desperation, he scrambled to the driver's side door, praying for a miracle. But the engine lay lifeless, the headlights extinguished. He could hear the villagers now, their voices rising in a cacophony, mingling with the rustle of leaves. Join us. Embrace the darkness. Ethan fought against the panic threatening to overwhelm him, searching for a way out. He recalled the old stories about the village, the hidden paths, the ancient trees that held secrets. If there was a chance to escape, he had to find it. The ancient path. With renewed determination, Ethan darted into the woods once more, the sounds of the villagers fading behind him. He pushed through the underbrush, moving away from the road, hoping to lose them in the darkness. The trees closed in around him, their gnarled branches weaving a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. He stumbled upon an old path, barely visible beneath the leaves, winding deeper into the forest. It was a path he had never seen before, one that seemed to beckon him with its silence. A shiver of instinct urged him to follow it. As he ventured further, the air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness enveloped him. The trees towered above, their bark twisted and ancient, as if holding memories of the past. An eerie feeling settled over him, prickling the back of his neck as if he were being watched. Ethan pressed on, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the damp earth. Then, just as he thought he might find refuge, he stumbled upon a clearing filled with strange symbols etched into the ground. They glowed faintly in the darkness, pulsating with an otherworldly light. He stepped closer, curiosity battling with fear. The symbols seemed to swirl and writhe, beckoning him to decipher their meaning. But as he reached out to touch one, a deep voice resonated from the shadows. "Leave this place, trespasser." Ethan spun around, heart racing. Emerging from the darkness was a figure, a woman cloaked in shadows, her eyes piercing through the gloom. She radiated a power that sent chills down his spine, her presence both captivating and terrifying. "You do not belong here," she continued, her voice echoing like thunder in the stillness. "The darkness seeks to claim you." "Who are you?" Ethan managed to stammer, his breath hitching in his throat. "I am a guardian of this land," she replied, stepping closer, the shadows swirling around her like a dark mist. "I protect those who wander too far into the depths of despair. But your time is limited. The villagers will not relent. You must choose embrace the darkness or flee." Ethan's mind raced as he weighed her words. He thought of the villagers, their faces twisted with fervor, their desperate chants echoing in his mind. They believed he was part of their dark tradition, a pawn in their ritual. But here before him stood a choice between surrender and survival. "I want to escape," he said, voice trembling. "What do I have to do?" "The price of freedom." The guardian regarded him with a mixture of pity and resolve. "To break the curse, you must confront your deepest fear, the darkness within you. Only then can you find your way home. But be warned, the journey will not be easy. The shadows will test you." With a nod of determination, Ethan accepted the challenge. He could feel the darkness gathering around him, the villagers' chants rising once more, their voices urging him to succumb. "Take the path behind me," the guardian instructed, gesturing to a narrow trail shrouded in shadows. "It leads to the heart of the darkness. But tread carefully, for the shadows will twist your fears into reality." Ethan stepped onto the path, heart pounding as he plunged deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches reaching out like grasping hands. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence enveloped him, broken only by the sound of his footsteps. As he ventured deeper, the darkness thickened, wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. Ethan felt the weight of his fears pressing against him, memories and insecurities surfacing as he navigated through the shadows, facing the darkness. Suddenly he found himself in a dimly lit space, a cavern illuminated by an ethereal glow. Inside, he saw his worst fears materialize before him, shadows of his childhood failures, haunting images of missed opportunities, and faces of those he had lost over the years. "No, this can't be real," he shouted, recoiling in terror. But the darkness laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "Face your fears, Ethan. Embrace them, or they will consume you." Ethan steeled himself, reminding himself of his journey. He had come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, confronting the shadows that danced around him. Each one flickered, morphing into memories that clawed at his mind. He saw himself as a child, afraid of the dark, unable to sleep without the light. He relived the pain of losing his mother, her soft voice fading into a whisper as she drifted away. "I can't let you win," he cried out, defiance igniting within him. With each step, he began to reclaim those moments, confronting his fear with anger. "You don't control me," he yelled, challenging the shadows that sought to consume him. As he faced his fears, the darkness began to retreat, swirling away like smoke in the wind. He felt the weight lift, the oppressive atmosphere fading as he reclaimed his strength. But just as he thought he had conquered the darkness, a chilling voice echoed through the cavern. "Foolish mortal, you think you can escape so easily." The final confrontation. The shadows swirled, coalescing into a dark figure, the leader of the villagers, his eyes glowing with malevolence. "You have chosen the path of defiance, but it will lead only to your doom." Ethan's heart raced as he faced the specter, its presence suffocating. "What do you want from me?" The leader stepped forward, a cruel grin on his face. "You are a part of our tradition now. Your fear is the key to our power. You cannot escape your fate." Ethan took a step back, fear threatening to engulf him. But he remembered the Guardian's words. He had faced his fears now. He had to confront the source of the darkness itself. "Your darkness has no hold on me," he shouted, his voice ringing with newfound strength. With a surge of determination, he stepped forward, facing the spectral figure. "I reject your power. I am not your sacrifice." The air crackled with energy, and the shadows around him roared in fury. Ethan raised his hands, channeling the energy of the woods, the strength of his memories, and the resolve he had forged through his journey. "Begone," he cried, a burst of light erupting from his palms. The shadows recoiled, shrieking in anguish as the light consumed them, banishing the darkness that had sought to claim him. The cavern trembled, the walls vibrating with the force of his defiance. The leader's form shattered into 1,000 pieces, dissipating into the ether, his final screams echoing into silence. The way home. As the darkness melted away, Ethan felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The cavern transformed, the walls shimmering with light, revealing the path back to the world outside. He stepped forward, breathless, filled with an overwhelming sense of relief and triumph. The guardian appeared beside him, a proud smile gracing her features. "You have faced the darkness and emerged stronger," she said, her voice a gentle melody. "You are free to go. The curse has been lifted." Ethan nodded, gratitude swelling within him. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without your guidance." The guardian gestured to the path ahead, a warm glow beckoning him forward. "Remember, Ethan, darkness will always exist, but so will your strength. Embrace it, and it will guide you home." With a final glance at the guardian, he stepped into the light, the warmth enveloping him like a comforting embrace. The woods shimmered around him, the familiar sounds of the night welcoming him back. He emerged onto the road, the villagers nowhere in sight. The moon hung high above, illuminating the path ahead, casting away the shadows of the past. Ethan climbed into his car, the engine roaring to life with a newfound vitality. He drove away, the memories of that night etched into his mind, the journey marking a turning point in his life. He had faced his fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged victorious. As he navigated the winding road, he felt a weight lifted from his heart, knowing that he would never take the journey home for granted again. Epilogue: The Return. Years later, Ethan returned to the village, now a place of light and joy. The tales of the darkness had faded, replaced by stories of courage and resilience. He stood at the edge of the woods, gazing into the heart of the forest, feeling the pull of memories long past. "Thank you," he whispered to the guardian, who appeared briefly, a smile gracing her lips. The woods whispered back, a reminder that darkness and light coexisted, each playing a role in the tapestry of life. Ethan knew that he would carry the strength he had forged within him, a testament to the journey he had taken, the last journey home. The Whispering Woods. Ethan stood at the edge of the woods, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The shadows danced at the periphery of his vision, and a soft wind rustled the leaves, whispering secrets of the past. He had left the village behind, but its grip still held tight. Memories flooded his mind, faces twisted in fear and desperation, the chants that echoed through the night, urging him towards the darkness. Despite the victory he felt, doubt crept in like a fog. What if the darkness returned? What if the villagers sought him out once more? He had faced the shadows, but he could still feel their presence lurking just beyond the light. As he took a deep breath, the guardian's words echoed in his mind. "Embrace your strength," he squared his shoulders and stepped into the woods, determined to reclaim the power that had nearly been stripped away. The Haunted Path. The path was narrow, overgrown with twisted roots and thorny vines that seemed to grasp at his legs as he walked. Each step felt like a defiance against the weight of the past, the whispers of the villagers' fears still ringing in his ears. He needed to confront the remnants of that night, find out what lingered in the shadows. As he delved deeper into the woods, he noticed the trees began to change, their bark twisted into grotesque shapes, faces appearing in the knots, their mouths silent yet screaming in horror. The air grew heavy, the atmosphere thick with tension. He pressed on, each footfall a reminder of the courage he had forged. Then, just ahead, he spotted a flicker of movement, a figure darting between the trees. His heart raced. Was it a villager, or something more sinister? He quickened his pace, driven by an insatiable curiosity and fear. "Hello," he called, his voice wavering. "Is anyone there?" The figure paused, silhouetted against the faint glow of the moon. A woman emerged from the shadows, her hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of ink. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the moonlight, and there was an ethereal quality to her presence. She looked both familiar and foreign, a haunting beauty draped in a flowing dress that whispered against the ground. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice a melodic echo in the stillness. "You've returned." "Who are you?" he asked, both fascinated and wary. "Do you live here?" "I am one of the lost," she replied, stepping closer, her feet barely touching the ground. "I was drawn into the darkness long ago, like you. But you escaped. Why have you come back?" "I need to understand," Ethan admitted, feeling the weight of her gaze. "I thought I was free, but the shadows still haunt me. I can't shake the feeling that they're waiting." The woman nodded slowly, her expression sympathetic. "The darkness never truly disappears. It lingers, waiting for those who are vulnerable. You must confront what lies within before you can find peace." The echoes of fear. Ethan felt a chill at her words. "What do you mean by what lies within?" "The shadows feed on fear, regret, and despair," she explained, her voice soft yet urgent. "You face them once, but they may rise again. Come with me, I will show you the heart of the woods." Intrigued, Ethan followed her deeper into the forest. The path twisted and turned, leading them to a clearing surrounded by ancient trees. At the center stood a stone altar, covered in moss and engraved with the same strange symbols he had seen before, symbols of fear and sacrifice. "This is where it began," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The villagers perform their rituals here, feeding the darkness with their fears. They believe it protects them, but in truth, it binds them to the shadows." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. "What can I do?" "You must break the cycle," she urged, her eyes shimmering with a hint of desperation. "To do that, you must confront the villagers and reveal the truth. Only then can you free yourself and those who are lost." Confronting the villagers. "They don't." Determined, Ethan stepped forward, the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders. "I will do it," he declared. "I'll confront them, but I can't do it alone." The woman smiled sadly. "You are never truly alone. The spirits of those who were lost are with you. Call upon them when you need strength." With newfound purpose, Ethan retraced his steps back to the village. The sun began to rise, casting a golden light that pierced through the darkness. He could see the villagers gathering, their faces pale and drawn, eyes filled with fear. As he approached, they turned to him, their expressions shifting from fear to confusion. "He has returned," one of them shouted, a mix of dread and reverence in their voice. "I've come to end this," Ethan declared, standing tall. "You cannot keep sacrificing your fears to the darkness. It's time to face the truth." The villagers murmured amongst themselves, uncertainty rippling through the crowd. Ethan felt their eyes on him, their fear palpable. "Do you not see?" he continued, his voice steady. "This cycle will only perpetuate your suffering. You must confront the shadows, not feed them. Together we can break free." The shadow's grip. "Noe." A murmur of dissent spread through the crowd. "You speak of things you do not understand," the village leader spat, stepping forward, his eyes burning with anger. "The darkness is our protection. It keeps the horrors at bay." "No," Ethan shouted, the desperation rising within him. "It is the horror. You don't understand what you're doing. You're feeding it. You think it protects you, but it only enslaves you." The villagers shifted uneasily, the leader's anger faltering as they began to consider Ethan's words. "Your fear gives it power," he continued, trying to reach them. "The only way to break free is to confront it. You've all felt it, the dread, the despair. Together we can face it, and we can win. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. A woman darted from the edge of the crowd, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. The shadows are coming. They seek you, Ethan. The villagers gasped, fear rippling through them. Ethan turned, his heart racing as a dark mist began to emerge from the trees, swirling and twisting into a monstrous shape. It loomed larger and larger, feeding off the villagers' fear, its eyes glowing with malice. "Face your fears," Ethan shouted, stepping forward. "Stand with me." The villagers hesitated, their eyes darting between the darkness and Ethan. But the darkness surged forward, a cacophony of whispers filling the air, echoes of their past, their regrets, their fears. The final stand. Together, Ethan called again, his voice steady. "We can do this. Remember your strength, your courage. You are not alone." One by one, the villagers began to step forward, their faces resolute. They formed a line beside Ethan, their fear giving way to determination. The shadows hesitated, their form flickering, as if unsure of their hold. Ethan raised his arms, calling upon the spirits of the lost, feeling their presence surround him. "We are more than our fears. We are the light that can push back the darkness." With a roar, he charged forward, the villagers following, their voices rising in unison. Together they faced the darkness, their combined strength pushing against the shadowy figure that sought to consume them. Light erupted from within them, a radiant glow that cut through the mist. The darkness recoiled, shrieking in fury, its form fracturing as the villagers confronted their fears. The shadows twisted, voices of despair echoing into silence as Ethan and the villagers stood their ground. With a final surge of light, the darkness shattered, dissolving into the air like smoke in the wind. The dawn of a new day. As the last remnants of the shadows faded, the villagers stood breathless, their faces illuminated by the first light of dawn. A sense of peace washed over them, the weight of the darkness lifted. "We did it," one villager whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan turned to them, a smile breaking through the tension. "We faced our fears together. We are free." The villagers began to embrace one another, the sense of camaraderie blossoming in the light of their victory. The village leader stepped forward, his expression softened. "You were right, Ethan. We were lost in our fear. Thank you for bringing us back." Ethan nodded, a feeling of closure enveloping him. "Let this be a new beginning. No more sacrifices to the darkness. We will forge a new path, one of light and hope." As they celebrated, Ethan felt a gentle breeze brush against his face, a reminder of the Guardian's presence. He had faced his fears and helped others do the same, breaking the cycle of darkness that had haunted them all. Epilogue: a legacy of light. In the years that followed, the village transformed. The whispers of the woods became tales of courage and resilience, a testament to the power of confronting one's fears. Ethan became a beacon of hope, sharing his story with others who had lost their way. He often visited the woods, feeling a deep connection to the Guardian who had guided him through the darkness. He would sit at the altar, now a place of remembrance rather than fear, and reflect on the journey he had taken. The villagers, once bound by their shadows, now thrived in the light. They no longer feared the whispers of the woods. Instead, they celebrated the stories of those who had been lost and found. And every now and then, on a quiet evening, Ethan would hear the soft echoes of laughter carried on the wind, a reminder that light would always triumph over darkness. The end. Story 3. Right. The Whispering Cottage. Marissa stood on the threshold of her new life, her heart fluttering with a mix of hope and trepidation. The cottage before her was quaint, but undeniably run-down, nestled on the outskirts of a sleepy coastal town. Weathered shingles clung to the roof like a weary old man's hair, and the paint, once a bright blue, was now a faded memory, peeling off in long, curling strips. She inhaled deeply, the salty air of the ocean mingling with the faint scent of damp wood as she pushed the creaking door open. Inside, the cottage felt alive. Each creak of the wooden floorboards echoed stories untold, whispers from the past that danced through the air. Marissa stepped inside, her shoes making soft thuds against the floor, and she closed the door behind her, sealing herself into this new sanctuary. Sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, casting a golden hue over the dust motes that floated lazily in the air. The walls were adorned with shadows, and the musty smell hinted at years of abandonment. Yet, she felt an inexplicable pull toward the place, a longing that hinted at possibilities waiting to be discovered. The surrounding cliffs rose steeply from the crashing waves below, their rugged beauty breathtaking in the late afternoon sun. Marissa could hear the relentless roar of the ocean, the sound mingling with the rustle of leaves in the brisk wind. It was a soothing melody that promised inspiration for her art, and she felt a spark of excitement ignite within her. The tumult of her recent breakup seemed a distant memory as she envisioned the canvases she would fill with the colors and emotions of her new surroundings. As she moved about the cottage, opening cabinets and peering into corners, she marveled at the potential for renewal. Here, she could immerse herself in her passion for painting, her brushstrokes mingling with the salty breeze and the vibrant hues of the coastal landscape. But little did she know, the solitude she craved would soon unravel into a nightmare she couldn't escape. A week passed in blissful isolation as Marissa began to settle in, transforming the cottage into a haven of creativity. Her days were filled with paint and canvas, the world outside fading into the background as she poured her heart onto each surface. But as night fell, the peaceful ambience shifted. One evening, while rummaging through a dilapidated trunk in the attic, Marissa stumbled upon a leather-bound diary. Its pages were yellowed and frayed, the ink barely legible in places. She flipped through it, her heart quickening with every frantic scrawl. "They come at night," one entry read, the handwriting trembling as if written in haste. "The guests. I can hear their whispers calling me." Marissa shivered, the hair on her arms standing on end. Who were the guests? The cryptic drawings that followed were disturbing, a series of stick figures encircled by strange symbols and dark scribbles that hinted at ritualistic practices. She felt a chill creep down her spine as she read more of the entries, recounting strange noises that echoed through the halls and shadows that danced just beyond the reach of her light. The first night she heard them, she brushed it off as the wind, but the whispers grew louder, teasing her ears with nonsensical phrases. "Marissa, join us." The sound wrapped around her, cold and serpentine, snaking through the cracks of her newfound peace. Each night it grew more persistent, feeding on her curiosity and drawing her deeper into a web of intrigue and dread. Fleeting shadows flitted at the edges of her vision, but when she turned to look, nothing was there. The sense of being watched settled over her like a heavy fog, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder, the stillness of the cottage now suffocating rather than comforting. Determined to uncover the truth, Marissa ventured into the nearby town, hoping to learn more about the cottage and its previous occupant. The village had a charm about it, with its cobblestone streets and quaint shops, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. The locals were friendly enough, but their smiles never reached their eyes. "Nice to meet you," she would say, introducing herself to shopkeepers and neighbors. Their responses were always polite, yet distant, like the wind carrying their words away before they could fully form. She began to notice how conversations would die when she mentioned the cottage. Eyes would dart away and lips would tighten into thin lines. It was as if the very mention of her home conjured an unspeakable fear. One evening, while sitting in a small cafe, she overheard two women whispering at a nearby table. The last occupant. She lost her mind, they say. One of them murmured, her voice trembling. Marissa leaned closer, straining to catch every word. They say she brought the darkness upon herself. What darkness? Marissa blurted out, unable to contain her curiosity. The women turned to her, surprise flickering across their faces, quickly replaced by a cautious wariness. It's just an old wives' tale, one replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nothing to worry about. But Marissa's mind was racing. There had to be more to the story. Each encounter with the townsfolk heightened her obsession with uncovering the truth behind the diary, the guests, and the eerie history that loomed over her cottage. She could feel the darkness creeping closer, and the walls began to close in on her. The first night she decided to stay up late, determined to confront the whispers. The air thickened with anticipation. She set up her easel in the living room, determined to capture whatever haunting beauty filled her surroundings. As she painted, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and shadows danced just beyond the flickering candlelight. The whispers began again, clearer this time, beckoning her closer. "Join us," they called, the voices swirling around her like a tempest. Marissa's brush hesitated on the canvas as the atmosphere thickened with tension. She was no longer alone. The flickering light cast long, twisting shadows that seemed to reach out to her, and she caught glimpses of shapes moving in her peripheral vision. Heart pounding, she turned her head, but found only the empty corners of her cottage. Determined not to succumb to fear, Marissa pressed on with her painting. The colors swirled and morphed under her touch, and as she stepped back to survey her work, her breath caught in her throat. What she saw was not the coastal landscape she intended to paint. Instead, the canvas depicted a twisted, shadowy figure standing behind her, its hollow eyes staring directly at her. Panic surged through her as she stumbled back, knocking over her easel. The figure in the painting seemed to shift and swirl, beckoning her to step closer. She could feel a pull, an invitation that threatened to drown her in its depths. As she retreated, the candlelight flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. Thud, sending a shiver down her spine. The whispers escalated into frantic cries, echoing through the room, mingling with the sound of crashing waves outside. Marissa felt a presence looming behind her, a weight pressing against her back, and she spun around, but there was nothing there. Only the dark corners of her cottage and the relentless sound of the ocean. The next day, Marissa's determination only deepened. She returned to the diary, desperately searching for clues that might explain the sinister happenings. The entries revealed a troubling pattern. The previous occupant had documented each visit from the guests, noting their increasing demands and her own fading sanity. One entry struck her particularly hard. "They hunger for something I cannot give. I fear they will take it from me." Marissa's heart raced as she flipped through the pages, each line more frantic than the last. In the attic, she uncovered an old photograph, dust-laden and faded. It depicted a group of people gathered in front of the cottage, their faces a mix of fear and excitement. Marissa felt a chill run through her as she recognized the building behind them, stark against the cliffs. She studied the expressions on their faces. They were desperate, eyes wide with terror, and their postures rigid as if they were holding on to something just out of frame. Digging deeper, She uncovered the remnants of what appeared to be a makeshift altar in the far corner of the attic, covered in dust and cobwebs. In the center lay an array of odd trinkets, broken mirrors, dried herbs, and symbols etched into the wooden surface. It was a shrine to something ancient and dark, something that sought to draw power from the living. That night, as the wind howled outside, Marissa felt a compulsion to paint once more. The eerie atmosphere enveloped her, and she slipped into a trance, her brush moving across the canvas as if guided by unseen hands. Each stroke grew more frantic, and she could hear the whispers crescendoing into a frantic chorus, urging her to finish her creation. In her mind's eye, she envisioned the figure from her previous painting, and as she captured its essence, she felt a surge of energy flowing through her, intoxicating and terrifying. She was painting a portal, a connection to something far beyond her comprehension. And in that moment, she unknowingly completed the ritual the diary had described. The atmosphere shifted dramatically as a chill swept through the room. Marissa's heart raced, and she felt the presence of the guests closing in on her. Shadows flickered against the walls, writhing like snakes, and the whispers morphed into urgent calls, chanting her name. Marissa. Join us. Complete the circle. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into tangible forms, figures emerging from the dark corners of her cottage, their faces indistinct but filled with a longing that transcended fear. They moved closer, their bodies swirling and shifting like smoke. "You've awakened us," one voice hissed, echoing through the room. "You've given us life again." Panic surged through Marissa as she stumbled back against the wall, desperately searching for an escape. "What do you want from me?" she screamed, her voice trembling with fear. The air grew colder, and the figures drew nearer, their presence suffocating. "The cycle must continue," they intoned, their voices merging into a singular chant. "You must pay the price." The realization struck Marissa like a bolt of lightning. The previous occupant had been sacrificed to feed the insatiable hunger of these entities. They had drawn her in with promises of power and creativity, but the cost was far greater than she had imagined. Determined not to become another victim, Marissa grabbed the diary from the floor, her heart pounding as she searched for a way to break the cycle. The entities surged toward her, their shadows stretching ominously. With trembling hands, she flipped through the pages, her eyes darting over the frantic words, seeking an incantation to sever the connection. "By the light of day and the strength of the sea, I bind you," she cried, her voice rising above the chaos. The figures paused, confusion flickering across their features as the energy in the room shifted. "You cannot bind us. We are eternal," they shrieked, their voices rising in an otherworldly chorus. Summoning every ounce of courage, Marissa pressed on, her voice unwavering. "I refuse to be part of your cycle. You are not welcome here." The air crackled with energy as the shadows writhed violently, pushing against the boundaries of the cottage. With a final, desperate incantation, she hurled the diary into the heart of the darkened figures. The moment it struck the ground, a blinding light erupted, illuminating the entire room as the shadows recoiled in horror. The walls shook, and the very foundation of the cottage seemed to tremble as if the house itself was trying to free itself from the clutches of the entities. The light consumed everything, and Marissa felt herself lifted off her feet as the figures howled in anguish. "You cannot escape," they cried, their forms dissolving into wisps of smoke. But the light only grew brighter until it enveloped her entirely, filling her with warmth and safety. As the brightness dimmed, Marissa found herself alone in the cottage. The whispers faded into silence, and the oppressive presence lifted. She fell to her knees, gasping for breath, her heart racing. The diary lay open at her feet, its pages blank, the words consumed by the light. Marissa dismissed the voices at first, attributing them to the isolation and the weight of her creativity. But as the days passed, they grew louder, more insistent. She began to notice things shifting in the cottage, a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, the sensation of being watched, and shadows that danced in her periphery. It was as if the very walls were alive, holding on to the memories of those who had come before her. One evening, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, Marissa descended into the depths of the cottage, seeking the source of the whispers. She found herself in the cellar, its stone walls damp and cold. In the dim light, she spotted an old wooden chest, its lid slightly ajar. A surge of apprehension gripped her as she approached, the air thick with a palpable energy. With a trembling hand, she pulled the lid open to reveal a collection of artifacts, broken mirrors, faded photographs, and strange talismans that pulsed with an unseen force. Among the items, she discovered a small, ornate mirror, its surface clouded with age. As she gazed into it, a wave of darkness washed over her, and the whispers crescendoed into a frenzy. Faces twisted in agony stared back at her, their mouths moving in silent screams. Marissa stumbled back, her heart racing, as a voice emerged from the shadows, clear and cold. "You've awakened us. You must fulfill the pact." Terror surged through her veins. She turned to flee, but the shadows coiled around her, pulling her back towards the chest. "You cannot escape your fate," they hissed, the words dripping with malice. "The artist before you succumbed, and so shall you, unless you complete the circle." Panicking, Marissa darted back to the attic, desperate to escape the suffocating presence that threatened to consume her. The diary lay open on the floor, and she frantically flipped through its pages, seeking answers, a way to break the bond that tethered her to this nightmarish reality. Her breath quickened as she read about the dark ritual that the previous occupant had engaged in a pact with the very entities that now sought her. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The previous artist had sacrificed her sanity to feed their insatiable hunger for creativity, and now they wanted her. "I refuse to become another victim," she shouted, determination flooding her with newfound strength. She could feel the shadows closing in, their cold breath on her skin, but she stood her ground. Marissa recalled the incantations woven through the pages of the diary. With every ounce of courage, she began to chant, her voice steady and powerful. "By the light of day and the strength of the sea, I bind you. You have no hold over me." The shadows recoiled, their forms wavering as if in a gale-force wind. But the entities were relentless. "You cannot banish us. We are eternal," they shrieked, their voices a chilling symphony of rage and desperation. The room trembled as the very foundations of the cottage seemed to shake under the weight of the impending confrontation. As the shadows surged towards her, Marissa clutched the diary tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to find the strength to end this. Summoning the light within her, she pressed on, her voice rising above the chaos. "I sever the ties that bind us. You are not welcome here." With a surge of energy, she hurled the diary into the depths of the darkened figures. The moment it struck the ground, an explosion of light erupted, illuminating the entire attic. The shadows writhed in horror, their forms distorting as they shrieked in anguish. The brightness consumed the room, wrapping around Marissa like a protective embrace, and she felt herself lifted off her feet. "No, you cannot escape," they howled, their cries fading into nothingness as the light enveloped her completely. With a final flash, the attic was filled with a blinding brilliance, and she felt the weight of the shadows lift. When the light finally dimmed, Marissa found herself alone in the attic. The whispers had faded, and the air felt lighter, free from the oppressive presence that had haunted her. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, her heart still racing. The diary lay open beside her, its pages now blank, the dark energy consumed by the light. In the days that followed, the cottage transformed. The once suffocating atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of peace that enveloped her like a warm embrace. The townsfolk greeted her with friendly smiles, sensing the change in her spirit. She resumed her painting, each stroke vibrant and alive, reflecting the joy and hope that had returned to her life. Yet deep within her, she knew the remnants of the past lingered. The crashing waves continued to echo against the cliffs, a reminder of the darkness she had faced. But as she stood at the edge of the cliffs one evening, watching the sun sink below the horizon, a soft breeze caressed her cheek, carrying with it a whisper. Marissa smiled, knowing she had triumphed over the darkness that sought to claim her. She had reclaimed her life and her art, weaving the whispers of the past into a tapestry of creativity and light. With renewed purpose, she turned back to her cottage, ready to embrace the solitude she had once craved and the beauty that awaited her. A beautiful, haunting legacy now intertwined with her own. She walked towards her easel, eager to continue her journey, knowing she had emerged from the shadows stronger than ever. As we reach the end of tonight's stories on Hauntales, it's time to let your mind drift away. Listen to the sound of the rain gently falling in the background. Let each drop calm your thoughts and ease you into a peaceful sleep. There's nothing to fear now, just the soothing rhythm of the rain. Focus on your breathing, let your body relax, and allow yourself to drift deeper into rest. Sleep peacefully, and we'll meet again tomorrow night for another story. Good night.